We welcome you to this session on air pollution, climate change, and public health. We have two great panelists, Kindra Weid and Darren Riley. Kindra is from Michigan Air, Michigan Health, and also Darren is the co-founder and CEO of Just Air. I'll be requesting Kindra to start first, and also please introduce yourself and also the institution you're representing. That will be great so that the audience can learn more about you and also the movement you are in to make that we have better air, better health. So the floor is yours, Kindra.
Thanks, Dr. Mola. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the summit to listen to our panel discussion today on air pollution, climate, and public health. And my name is Kindra Weid. I am a critical care registered nurse, and I'm also the coalition coordinator with My Air, My Health. And what that is it's a coalition of health professionals. We are mostly nurses that advocate for clean air in Michigan. We believe that a cleaner, healthier future is possible for all Michiganders. We formed in April of 2012, which was when a host of public health and environmental health organizations came together. And we were looking at data that was showing high asthma and hospitalization rates around communities that were near and around coal-fired power plants in Michigan. And so we decided that action needed to be taken to improve air quality and public health. And so our main goal is to make the connection between cleaner energy and transportation policies and better health outcomes. So we advocate for a health in all policies approach. And we also connect health professionals to opportunities to educate and advocate for policies that improve outdoor air quality and reduce health impacts associated with air pollution and ultimately also with climate change. So today I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief presentation on the health impacts of air pollution, how climate is intertwined into public health outcomes, and give some examples of some current advocacy efforts in Michigan to improve quality and maybe something that you can get interested in as well. So on this slide here, I wanted to first talk about the components of air pollution and how they impact human health. For those of you who were able to join yesterday's session with Dr. Lisa Del Bono from MICA, the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action, she went over the health impacts of air pollution as well. But so I will do this a little, we use different slides and I covered a couple things that she didn't cover and vice versa. So I think between the two presentations, you'll have a really concise understanding. But I do want to just give a broad overview really quickly before I go into the advocacy work that we do, because I think it just helps to solidify your understanding of how human health is interrelated to air pollution and also climate change. So really quickly, regarding particulate matter, these small particles, the ones shown here in red on the diagram, are the size of most of the particles emitted when fossil fuels are combusted. And you'll often hear this referred to as soot. It's kind of the layman's term for it. Soot is smaller than 2.5 microns in diameter. It's about 1/20th the width of a human hair. And it's called particulate matter 2.5 or PM 2.5. So research has consistently shown that PM 2.5 is toxic to humans and responsible for most of the public health burden that we see associated with air pollution. But there's even emerging data on even smaller particles called ultrafine particles, and those entail anything from 0.1 microns in size. So early evidence is pointing to different health impacts depending on the particulate matter size and how these particles navigate the small bronchioles and the lung defenses. So here is a video that I wanted to show you guys that shows how particulate matter circulates throughout the body. The sound isn't, I'm going to go ahead and play it though, because I think the animation is worth it for you to see. And oh, I'm going to go ahead and mute it though. Let's see if I can mute it and still play the video. But what this is essentially showing is how particle pollution enters in through the lungs and airways, specifically particulate matter, and how it can have impacts on respiratory, systemic cardiovascular impacts, and also in the brain. So they're demonstrating how small it is. And because it's so small, it can pass into the bloodstream during oxygenation and get circulated throughout the body. And these are some of the components of particle pollution, and they're all related to carcinogens or have been shown to be carcinogenic. So you can see how it causes inflammation as it travels through the coronary arteries and through the vasculature, and then also causes inflammation, can cause hypertension, can also be leading to stroke. It's also correlated with cardiovascular disease, myocardial infarction, and contributing to heart attacks. And I'll go through all of each of these health outcomes, but I think the visualization of it is helpful. I'll also provide the link so that you can watch this in your own spare time, because I do think it's worthwhile for you to see it and actually hear the audio that accompanies it. So particulate matter and PM 2.5 is not the only air pollutant that we're concerned about regarding health impacts when fossil fuels are combusted. There's also other byproducts that we're concerned about from a health perspective, and those include some of the components that go on to create ground level ozone. And so all of you have probably heard of air action days or ozone action days. We have those somewhat regularly in the summer here in Michigan. On average, we have probably between 6 to 10 ozone action days a year. These are days, ground level ozone is created through this chemical reaction between volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, that's triggered by sunshine. So these ozone action days are typically only in the summer. When ozone forms at the ground level and is inhaled, it's very toxic to the lung. It triggers inflammation, and it's a trigger for asthma attacks and other respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. So on air action days, we rely on air monitors to let us know what ozone levels are and to give us a warning to sensitive populations that they need to be mindful of the amount of time that they're spending outside on these days, because they're actually exposing themselves to a potential trigger for negative health outcomes such as an asthma attack. And so this is a graphic from the 2020 American Lung Association report. It's called the report is called The Road to Clean Air. But what I like about this graphic is that it highlights the main public health benefits of widespread electrification of the transportation sector by 2050, but it concisely highlights all the health impacts of ozone pollution and particle pollution, both of which have been widely researched and they're responsible to most of the public health burdens associated with air pollution. So it makes sense that the impacts on the upper respiratory and respiratory systems related to exposure to air pollution, just simply by the nature of the way that it enters into the body. So for persons with asthma, air pollution can trigger inflammation, mucus production, and constriction of the airways. And that often elicits that asthma attack that we're used to describing, which is an exacerbation of a chronic condition. For patients with COPD, and this is often the patients that I see in my role as a nurse, I'm a critical care nurse in a medical ICU. I'll often see an exacerbation of their condition. People who have lifelong COPD from some other cause, say they were a smoker, can be functioning just fine, and then on a very high heat day have an exacerbation, an acute stress response to it could be an allergen, it could be air pollution, or it could just be extreme heat or humidity, and that can cause their chronic condition to go into an acute state where they need extra support and end up being admitted to the hospital, and sometimes on a ventilator in my ICU where I work. So lung cancer is also linked to air pollution exposure, as well as chronic laryngitis and acute and chronic bronchitis. The World Health Organization recently reported on research findings estimating the amount of deaths from lung cancer, stroke, and heart disease that can be attributed to air pollution. And as you can see, this is a significant amount. You can see it's almost about a third of the deaths they can attribute to air pollution exposure. In 2013, the IARC, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, they declared air pollution and particulate matter as a whole, that whole little molecule that we saw that has the arsenic and the black carbon and the lead, the whole particulate matter as a whole is considered carcinogenic. So according to a 2020 overview of the current evidence on and public health recommendations on outdoor air pollution and cancer from researchers at the American Cancer Society, they state that there is very clear and substantial evidence of a link between outdoor ambient pollution and particularly PM in outdoor air with lung cancer incidence and mortality, causing hundreds of thousands of lung cancer deaths worldwide. So, and that's annual data. So all told, there's an estimated 7 million premature deaths worldwide annually that we can attribute to indoor and outdoor air pollution, and the majority of the world's population breathes polluted air. So that led the World Health Organization to reevaluate the standards that they had for these outdoor air pollutants. And they created new lower air quality guidelines for 6 criteria pollutants. And the rationale for this was that air pollution is now recognized to be the single biggest environmental threat to human health. So as that video had highlighted as well, the heart and lungs are uniquely interdependent upon each other. And anything impacting the lungs also impacts the heart and vice versa. And research has shown that air pollution can trigger heart attacks, arrhythmias, congestive heart failure, or exacerbations of congestive heart failure. And these processes are all linked to the systemic vascular inflammation that we highlighted in that video. So there's also growing body of evidence linking cognitive deficits and impairment related to exposure to air pollution. And this is newer research. There's already been a clear demonstration of a link between exposure to air pollution and stroke, but there's also emerging data on exposure to air pollution and its association with autism. That would be the mother's prenatal exposure to air pollution and then the child's outcome of autism. There's also links to dementia and behavioral changes, such as influxes in aggression and crime during poor air quality days. And this research is in its earlier stages, but it's definitely interesting and pathophysiologically understandable given what we know about inflammation and the displacement of oxygen to essential parts of the brain. This is not all a conclusive list regarding the health impacts of air pollution and exposure to air pollution. There's also significant research linking prenatal exposure to air pollution and preterm birth and low-term birth weights, and then also increased risk for death from SARS-CoV-2 infection in persons with long-term exposure to air pollution, and also increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes related to that inflammatory response. So you saw this slide with Dr. Del Bono's presentation as well, but it's what I really would like to relay to you and what's important to understand about the combustion of fossil fuels is that it's harmful to human health on 2 fronts. Not only does it create air pollution that's directly breathed in and triggers asthma attacks and the other health burdens that I just described, but it also emits greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change, which then impact human health and have negative impacts of their own. So this slide demonstrates, I think quite well, the most significant climate change impacts that we see, their effect on exposures, and the subsequent health outcomes that can result from these changes in exposures. So I want you to take a minute, because certainly not all of these are applicable to Michigan, but I'd like you to think about what health impacts we're already seeing in Michigan as a result of climate change. And next, I want to talk to you about the initiatives that we advocate for, so you can kind of understand what sorts of policies that we actually educate and use the health voice to try and get some movement and gain some ground on air pollution to improve air quality and to also combat climate change. To address the air pollution issue and climate emissions as a whole, we definitely need to take a look at the major sources and then also look at the policies that control those sources. So here's a breakdown of greenhouse gases as reported by the EPA in 2020. And the transportation sector is not only the leading contributor to climate emissions, but it's also the leading source of harmful air pollution. And it's a key area in which we direct our advocacy. So what are some ways that we can work to decrease transportation emissions? So what we try to do is advocate and educate about policies that look to clean up emissions. So some examples of those are fuel switching, alternative fuels, improving fuel efficiency or economy standards, improving operating practices, and reducing actual miles traveled. So as an example of fuel switching or alternative fuels, we're part of an electric bus advocacy group called It's Electric. And we work together on, let me back up just to the first one, the idle reduction. So we work on improving operating practices as part of our idle reduction work group. So we work on idle reduction. It's a coalition that tries to decrease emissions in Southeast Michigan. And it's a community-based monitors that we're trying to use at schools to implement an idle reduction. We're trying to get the buses to stop idling, and we want to take air quality data before and after the intervention is actually underway. So this helps to educate about the health impacts of diesel emissions, which are most of the buses are diesel, and how that can impact the air quality for kids while they're waiting in line to get on and off the buses. And so we partner with that group, the idle reduction group, and we also work with our It's Electric school group, which we're trying to advocate for electric school buses in Michigan. And we work on both of these issues together because by decreasing idling emissions, hopefully we're creating a stepping stone and helping the school district to understand that by decreasing emissions, it's good for public health, it's good for student health, and then also trying to get them to transition to completely zero emission vehicles so that they can understand that if they transition, we can eliminate that exposure for kids. And these two areas are very interrelated, and they kind of are a continuum of work of trying to improve air quality at the school level. And Darren, who's going to talk next, is a big part of getting more community-based monitors at schools, at churches, and more non-regulatory monitors throughout Michigan. So a little bit more about the electric school bus. That's kind of the hot topic right now, and the one thing that we've been advocating for quite. If anyone's been watching the news, there was a huge amount of money that was passed towards electrifying school buses with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we've been trying to get the word out to school districts so that they can participate and take advantage of this rebate program. So each day in Michigan, almost 600,000 school children hop on the bus and travel an average of 40 minutes a day. So unfortunately, most of them, over 95% of buses are diesel. And so diesel emissions are a highly toxic soup of 40 known carcinogens. The fumes are known to be associated with irritation of the upper respiratory tract. They also irritate the respiratory system. They cause headaches, nausea, poor concentration, and cognitive performance, and behavioral problems. So these are all contribute to making it difficult for children to learn once they get to school. Diesel exhaust is a known trigger for asthma, and that is a leading cause of school absenteeism, asthma attacks. So one study at the that was completed by University of Michigan epidemiologists estimated that by transitioning to clean school buses across the country could result in 14 million fewer absences among bus riding school children per typical school year. So I think we can all agree that there's no need for our children, much less our drivers or our school bus mechanics, to be exposed to diesel emissions any longer, and that our children deserve a clean commute to school. So the EPA recognized this as well. And in the past year, they money, as I was talking about from the bipartisan infrastructure law, they committed $5 billion over 5 years to replace existing diesel school buses with zero emissions buses. So some of our coalition partners are listed here. We've partnered with the Michigan Association of Pupil Transportation, with Moms Clean Air Force, and the Environmental Law and Policy Center to get the word out about this program and to help school districts apply. We also work with other health and air quality advocates, school nurses, and clean mobility advocates to help spread the word so that they understand the health impacts of diesel air pollution and understand how electrifying our school buses will help to improve the air quality for our kids and our drivers and our community, and will help decrease climate emissions as well. So we've been reaching out to school districts for the program was from May until August, and we spent the summer reaching out to school districts. We haven't heard the final awards. They'll be coming any week now. Probably in the next week or two, we'll learn what school districts in Michigan were awarded the rebate. So it's really exciting. So pay attention to the news. You'll probably hear about electric school buses coming to your town. Actually, Michigan, I'll brag a little bit. Michigan is leading the Midwest in school bus electrification. We have 17 electric school buses on the road. Thanks, dude. I'm glad you're excited too, because it's not a huge brag when you think about states like California and New York have hundreds of electric school buses. But you know what? I think it's great that Michigan's leading the Midwest in this initiative. And we've been a great resource for other states in the Midwest to kind of help them get acclimated to the idea of transitioning to electric school buses. Continue that work. But that kind of segues into the work that we also have to do, and I'll make sure I'm staying on time here. As we transition to cleaner electric vehicles, we also need to make sure that our grid is clean as well. So when I first started with Meyer My Health, our main goal was to get coal offline. And that is one of the dirtiest forms of energy production. And there has already, in the time that I've been with Meyer My Health since 2015, there's already been this huge shift among our energy monopolies to improve their emissions and their carbon footprints. And much of this was a result of public pressure and advocacy around the health impacts, around the climate impacts, and around the environmental impacts that were highlighted during what we call an IRP process. And I'll explain that in a minute. But this is a relatively new process that was just put into statute in 2016. And the first IRP was submitted by DTE, which is our Southeast Michigan energy provider, in 2019. So what an IRP is, and this is extremely technically wonky, but I'll try to explain it really quickly. It's an integrated resource plan, and it's part of our state level regulatory process, requiring our public utilities to submit projections for how they plan to provide reliable and safe energy to their customers. And they're usually submitted every 5 years. And these plans are open to public comment. And so there's a period where the utility submits their plan, and then people like myself or people like you, if I get you excited and fired up enough about it, can go ahead and submit public comments telling them that, hey, you're not using enough renewable energy, or hey, you're not paying enough attention to the public health impacts of the emissions, or you're not taking coal offline quick enough, or you're replacing your coal with too much natural gas. And so this is an opportunity for us to insert the health voice into policy. And so here's where we definitely push timelines for coal retirements. We also advocate for more cleaner and renewable energy to be used. So that's how we're trying to improve the grid and make it cleaner. So we rely on our utilities and our regulatory bodies to report emissions data and make this information public knowledge. However, there are major gaps in the regulatory process that I'm sure Darren will highlight. And relying on utilities to report their own emissions data opens opportunities to mistrust. And so because of this, and because of grassroots action, we are seeing a rise in the number of community-based monitors being placed in neighborhoods to help gather and collect more data in the fight for clean air. And Darren will talk to you in much further detail about this, but by expanding to community-based monitors and data collection, we can get more granular data at the community level. And we can use that data to provoke action. And but there's also good news for Darren and his work. There was recent funding committed in the Inflation Reduction Act that will dedicate further money towards better health data, using innovative technology to identify pollution hotspots and blind spots. So hopefully that will help support his work as well. So back to the IRP process, just to give you an update for anyone who's interested in this, the Consumers Energy IRP just wrapped up, and we had some success in that. We encouraged them to not replace their coal that they're retiring with more natural gas plants. They wanted to buy 4 new natural gas plants to replace that coal. We were able to get them to only purchase 1. So that was considered a victory for us, and victory for public health, victory for climate. And then for any audience members that are in Southeast Michigan, we're going to start coordinating around the DTE IRP, which will be coming up next. And then I'll just briefly talk about a couple other initiatives in Michigan. If you're interested, there's other ways that you can act are to decrease barriers to clean and renewable energy. And there's a couple bills that are here that you can take a look at in your spare time. One, we are not allowed to have community solar gardens in Michigan, and we think that community solar is great. It expands clean and renewable energy, and that's good for air quality and good for public health. And then we also have a cap on the amount of generation that people can have on their own rooftops. It's limited at 1%, and we want to lift that cap because why would you want to limit the amount of energy that's clean and renewable that people can produce on their own? So that's just a brief description of those bills. But so those are some examples of some of the advocacy efforts that you can get involved in and insert the health voice into. And I hope this kind of inspired folks to use their voice, talk about health impacts, make those connections about air pollution, what's happening with health, and how that relates to climate change, and become a climate advocate. So I encourage you to watch out for action on any of these initiatives. There's many more. If you want to reach out to me, I can help connect you to something that's going on in your area. But the health voice is very important for clean air and to combat and mitigate climate change. And we advocate for a health in all policies approach. And we encourage you to keep this in mind as you vote as well. And as they say at MICA, the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Change, a vote for climate is a vote for health.
So it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Darren Riley of Just Air, who is the founding person and also the CEO of that Just Air organization. Would like to hear from Darren about himself and also his organization before he starts talking about his presentation. Welcome, Mr. Darren.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, first of all, I really appreciate this panel, and Kindra, what a wonderful job in your presentation. I learned a ton about my own health throughout a presentation that I wasn't aware of. So super excited, stoked to share with you all my journey in this work. And I'm inspired by the folks around this room, quite frankly. And Kindra really got me fired up just with all the work that grassroots organizations and across the board from our whole state that are really trying to move the needle on community health, especially for those disadvantaged communities. So I'm a little juiced up. Really got me excited coming up to 5 o'clock. So I will share a presentation, and really probably wouldn't take any more than 10 minutes or even so. But really I want to cover, first of all, can you all see this? Well, and do you all see that change? Let's make sure. Perfect. And really, so today I really wanted to share my personal story and how I got into the space, the problem space around environmental justice. 2, what does Just Air actually do? What are some of the capabilities, and how do we intend to create that world that we all envision, that no matter where you're born, what skin color you're born into, neighborhood you're from, you have equal access to clean air, clean water, and particularly clean air in our case. And 3, what are some of the upcoming, and Kindra talk to a bit of those, but some of the upcoming opportunities for our state to move the needle on some of these issues from the Inflation Reduction Act and other initiatives. So without further ado, I'd love to center us around the 20,000 breaths on average that a person takes per day. Is very important and critical to all of our work. When we bring attention to that, 1, 2, 3, 4 breath that we take per day, we realize that it's so important to the well-being, as Kindra pointed out in her presentation, of your health outcomes. So depending on where you work, you play, you live, you learn, has a tremendous bearing on your outcomes in your life, right? And this is an example that I think this research came from University of Michigan, doing environmental justice screening Environmental justice screening, it takes into account environmental factors such as pollution, ozone, different issues, education, right? Income levels as well, and a lot of traffic proximity. So where communities next to highways, right? Or trucking traffic. What you see here are some of the top census tracts that have the highest environmental justice score. This is a score that you don't want to have the highest, of which you see representation from Kalamazoo, Kent County, and Wayne County with some of this environmental justice score. And there are new frameworks, which we'll get to towards the end of the presentation. Justice 40 framework is something that we're using to frame up, some of the census tracts that deserve and qualify as disadvantaged community, that qualify for a lot of this funding and opportunity. So the whole point here is I want to share with you all that, depending on where you live, does have a tremendous outcome, as we already know, to your health because of those environmental factors. And why is it important to me? Mainly because I'm a product of that, right? My father always told me I'm a product of my environment. My father actually grew up with asthma. He is from Baisley, Queens projects, if people are aware of New York City. Back in the 80s, a lot of smog in that community. When he grew up, he had asthma. He wasn't really aware of it at the time. In fact, he used to always tell me a story where his uncles would sit him down when he'd think he was having an acute asthma attack and say, hey, drink some water and just calm down. You'll be all right, right? That's literally just the gap of education and how far we've come as society to recognize some of these health impacts. Unfortunately for my father, he was actually incarcerated when I was 5 years old. And why that's important is because that was actually when he was diagnosed with asthma. He was diagnosed when he was in prison. And upon his release, when I was 15, I bear witness to see how asthma impacts his life, right? Providing food on the table requires a healthy lung. He was restricted to manual labor typically at odd times in the evening. That requires, definitely a lung and respiratory system to upkeep, lifting factory boxes, et cetera. And I wasn't really in tune, quite honestly, with some of the environmental factors that made him who he is until I actually was diagnosed with asthma 4 years ago. I live in Southwest Detroit, like 500 feet out my window is the highway. Why do I continue to live here? Because I am hopeful that we can move us in the right direction here in my community. But until I had that disease, I wasn't aware of that. I played basketball at Carnegie Mellon. I did all these great things. I consider myself an athlete. But the asthma really changed my perspective on a lot of things. Having a struggle for breath, wheezing at night, temperature change. Where's my inhaler? I need to refill it. All these little factors that weigh on you. And I can only imagine how other families have to deal with that, who have other barriers, systems against them. Also, I just want to share here, Detroit was listed as the #1 most challenging place to live in the U.S. for asthma. The report came out last month by the Asthma, Allergy, and Health Foundation. So this is very relevant to our state. We want to get this bad press off of our state and do some of the great things that Kindra alluded to. So I wanted to set the problem space there. One big thing I wanted to point out is researchers have found that air pollution costs the U.S. $600 billion annually. This is important to note because kids missing days at school, right? It's a cost. The cost of people missing days at the workplace, the unfortunate circumstance when someone, dies prematurely, right? And some of the illnesses that we heard from the last presentation. And most of all, the cost to remediate some of these air pollution issues in the environment, right? In Clearton, PA, predominantly Black community just outside of Pittsburgh, one of my good buddies lives there and was telling me a story in 2016 about there was a spill around the holidays. There was a gas spill, how they know in advance. But during that time, people were smelling something weird. They didn't know who to contact. They didn't know what was going on. It turns out there was a major chemical that caused cancers in that community. And until they remediate those issues, the community was plagued with that. So just imagine that in terms of, how do we remediate issues, but also what's the impact and cost on that health burden on that community now, right? So the real issue, as we all are here today and why Just Air exists, is that we don't have enough transparency, enough data to not only think actively what's going on right now, but also proactively. How do we understand what solutions could actually help improve environmental factors? And so many communities have maybe 1 or 2 reference stations. I have a couple around me here in Southwest Detroit. In Grand Rapids, there's 1 reference station. I think there's 1 ozone monitor for the region in Kent County. We added 1 as well, which I'll get into. But the whole point of Just Air is to give us more visibility, allow us to take off the blindfold so we can understand exactly what's going on from a block to block perspective. That's the end vision. And by knowing what's going on, having that transparency, we can then deploy and measure solutions like electrification of school buses, right? Like canopying, like redistributing trucking traffic, so they're not all going through the same road, the same community. How do we do that? Really quick, I'll share a couple of our examples, but ultimately Just There is a community insights platform that provides different tools. Monitoring is our bread and butter, but we also have tools to triangulate pollutants. We also have tools to autonomously track trucking traffic and marrying that data so we can understand what's really going on. Again, I want to be clear that Just Air's whole mission is around health disparities. And so the idea is, how do we pinpoint those sources of pollutions so that we can then form solutions to mitigate and curb those risks for those vulnerable communities. So dive into it, give you a couple case studies for our monitoring insights. We have about 11 monitors in Grand Rapids. Those who live in Grand Rapids here, you all have access to this data. I'll be sure to put the link in here, but here you can opt in to receive text alerts in real time when there is air quality index spikes. And for those who are new around the air quality space, air quality index is basically a rolling average for particulates that will harm us. And so basically when they hit up a certain threshold, you'll get a notice and also things to do. So for example, close your windows when you're driving, try to turn the AC on if you're fortunate enough to have that in the car, right? Refrain from strenuous activities during that day, similar to like some ozone action days, but trying to get more data so we can be more accurate and have more frequency in some of those actions. Another example, another tool that we're trying to mature is how we detect pollutants. We had a project in a oil and gas refinery in which we're trying to bring this on to our community, but taking a particulate matter, taking a said pollutant, geolocation and wind, and using a little bit of calculus to automatically generate these maps you see here on the right. Hopefully people can see the arrows, but essentially what this technology is doing is taking this data, automatically generating these KML files, which a lot of files like Google Maps are built on, and drawing these arrows to pinpoint where we have a confidence, depending on the wind and the strength of the pollutant source, this case Besnine, could be coming from. In a refinery, this allows them to quickly remediate issues in terms of leaks. In a community, which we're interested in even leveraging, think about a utility company who is redoing pipes, like happening right now in our community in Southwest Detroit for gas pipes. If there's a gas leak, there's a gas issue, getting ahead of the curve, having monitors to be able to pinpoint where issues are happening can help us save costs, like the Claritin example in Pennsylvania, and protect lives ultimately. So this is a pollution source detection tool. We're still early stages of deploying this out and scaling this, but eventually we'll love to add this to our community monitoring package so we can not only know what's going on in the environment, but know where it's happening. Last but not least, my favorite tool in the tool shed. As you can see, I'm a tech geek, but the trucking traffic monitoring tool is a really awesome opportunity. Trucking traffic disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. Many researchers have shown this. We call this the NO2 inequality, Black carbon inequality. A lot of this comes from ports, especially in LA and other ports in Louisiana. Many of the ports, when they have those trucks, they typically take highways that have been redlined to bear hug our communities with a lot of these pollutants. And so what we've effectively built with funding from the University of Michigan, and we're piloting this here in Southwest Detroit around some of the idling. We're testing this out, by the way, Kindra. We're just going to deploy it and just figure it out. But we've piloted and tested this technology out. And what you see here in front of you is one of a kind way of autonomously tracking trucking traffic, right? Maintaining a target of that truck. So that truck that passed by, we can track it throughout the whole video. Why that's important to track unique trucks is that this technology can be used for anti-idling. How long did that truck exist in the video camera feed for how many minutes, how much time, or how many trucks have passed through this local road, which we struggle to have. And today, many communities write on a piece of paper or count manually, which I've done some of that volunteering, of how many trucks have passed. So this is technology that can not only be helpful to inform policy, but also enforce. In fact, in New York City, there is an anti-idling law in which they have residents go around and take 3-minute clips. And there's a lot of backlash on that, but residents get paid if they catch someone idling, right? This is a policy that they're testing out in the city, and people make a living off this stuff. However, obviously, you can imagine this is a huge backload for quality assurance in the city, but also there may be ways to do this in a more a healthy way that we don't have our community members sitting in front of trucks inhaling fumes, such as clean tech, just computer vision. We built coalitions, mainly focused in Grand Rapids where we started, but we're also launched in Detroit and also in Waterbury, Connecticut, and other communities. We've done some work in Chicago as well. But really what Just Air is trying to do is bring community together, from grassroots organizations to city, to state level, to health systems, to even advocacy groups such as Kindra's or NAACP, folks that are fighting for policy on behalf of their communities. And it's essential in what Just Air is doing. I truly believe in this work, it takes a village. I know we're short on time. The last two things I want to mention is that the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge opportunity, not only for our communities, but for our state to receive this funding. And I was at the Congressional Black Caucus 2 weeks ago with some of the heads of the Department of Transportation. And they are very intentional about making sure this money goes to shovel-worthy communities. So communities that qualify in the Justice 40 framework that are disadvantaged, but shovel-worthy. But also, as we know, shovel-worthy communities are not always shovel-ready. And so our time and working with organizations is making sure communities have the infrastructure, are aware that this funding exists, right? Just like the electrification of school buses. So we can really prepare them to get access to this funding to make sure we move our state in the right direction when it comes to air pollution monitoring, activities to protect our youth and learning and their communities and learning, and ultimately spread more awareness to curb some of those issues. And really quick, some of the Justice 40 frame research, I'm happy to share that with this group. Through Michigan, I shared the asthma report, but in Michigan, there's 858 disadvantaged community census tracts that will qualify. And that actually comes out to approximately 2.5 million persons in Michigan, Michiganders, who actually live in a disadvantaged community, right? And they would qualify for a lot of these opportunities in this funding. And so I think it's a really important opportunity to move us off the asthma capital list, move those numbers all the way down. So we're not, I think we're the 6th most census tracts. I know every state has different census tracts, but we're pretty high in that number, and to decrease the amount of exposure that disadvantaged communities have when it comes to environmental factors. So with that said, I love this stuff. I can talk for another hour or two, but I wanted to transition to questions. But I'm excited to be with this community, and I'm a Michigander at heart, even though I'm from Texas. And it's people like Kindra and others who keep me here and want to work on this mission.